Okay, good morning. This is Mark Arnold, Senior Vice President of Marketing with Zap Surgical. Welcome and thanks to everyone for joining us today for our third webinar as part of the fall SRS webinar series. The fall lineup does include 11 talks over 11 weeks, and if you haven't already, I do encourage everyone to visit the fall.srs-webinars.com website to review the future talks that we have in store for you. And through this website, you can also register to view recordings of prior webinars as well. And one last item of business before we get started. If you would like to submit any typewritten questions at any time during today's talks, you can do so by using the Q&A button found at the bottom of your Zoom console. And time permitting, your questions will be addressed at the end of today's talk. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce today's moderator, Dr. John Adler. Dr. Adler is the CEO and co-founder of Zap Surgical, inventor of the CyberKnife system, and professor emeritus of neurosurgery and radiation oncology at Stanford University. Dr. Adler, over to you.
Thank you, Mark, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this morning, this evening, wherever you are in the world today. I'm delighted to present today's speaker, Peter Douglas Klassen, who generally goes by the name Douglas, who is chief physician and neurosurgeon at Bonifatius Hospital in Lingen, Germany. Dr. Klassen is best experienced in spine surgery, but of particular note has an interest in robotic spine surgery, which I think you're going to find of particular application to his latest endeavor here with Zap. Equally important, Douglas has been at the forefront of providing world-class care in rural environments, and this is part of a personal story. And Douglas originally hails from Uruguay, and perhaps that's part of the path that leads him today to talking about Zap and his future plans for Zap in Lingen, Germany. And I think I'd like to be a prequel to what's going to go on today. Is a big part of the Zap story is to bring radiosurgery to locations where it was never before possible. Historically, radiosurgery was bottled up in the Mass Generals of the world and the major institutions where the complexity of radiosurgery could be managed. But we're trying to change all that with this next generation product. And I'm just delighted, beyond delighted, that Douglas Klassen is part of this next generation of radiosurgical practitioners with this Apex. So without further ado, welcome, Douglas.
Thank you so much, John. It's a pleasure for me to be introduced to this great webinar series. And it is a pleasure for me to talk a different story than normally people assisting to these webinars would hold on. I'm a neurosurgeon trained on brain, but actually working on spine. So I want to take all of you in this morning to a little journey to the back of the beyond, or as we would call it, in the middle of nowhere. And Zap Surgical, if we have the next slide, Zap Surgical has been a translational and a paradigmatic change of ideas and how we see SRS in the future. And probably what we are seeing today and what we have achieved in Lingen so far, which is a town of 60,000 people, could be something copy-paste to other places in the world as well. So for today's agenda, I want to talk about our values in SRS and how they become applicable for Lingen. I want to share how we put our strategy in some godforsaken spot to get that system down to us. And of course, everybody's going to want to know, well, what is going to be next? So what are our plans for the coming months? So first, to talk about our values, and we want to talk about the values for the patient. SRS in general is known to be effective, safe, quick, and affordable. But what it is specific to ZapX that seems to be more interesting at all. First of all, it is frameless. It is it's a painless treatment, especially for indications classically done with gamma knives. Second, it is from its physical characteristics even better on constraints comparing to cyberknife and to gamma knife. So you just a tumor and no, not the brain. Third, it is a wall-free. This is actually something completely different and changing. It brings radiation therapy on your parking lots, and eventually even family goes in with the patients to be treated. It has a specific online dosimetry that hopefully is going to avoid errors and problems done in the past with stereotactic radiosurgery. But the most important and the thing that is so appealing for us is we have it available in our place. We can have dedicated SRS treatments in a place like my hospital in a small countryside. What are the values of our hospital? The St. Bonifatius Hospital is a Christian hospital dedicated for patient care. But of course, we want to have first-class technology, because if not, we are not going to be competitive with other providers in the area. Third of all, we are a teaching hospital for University Hospital in Münster, and we are a non-profit organization. That means that we are going to be able to provide 10% of our treatments to either charity or scientific research. And this is something totally new. Normally, research we would do in big hospitals and big centers, but I do think that if you have mid-sized hospitals with dedicated teams, you're going to be able to do good scientific research as well. What are the values of the payers? The insurance companies basically care for cost. The cost of the treatment is the main criteria. It is always a technical and never an emotional decision. You file a patient to them, and the insurance companies will decide whether they pay it yes or no. And of course, as SAPX is a new and unseen technology, of course there are unknown potential benefits and very few worldwide experience to SAPX. But there comes my personal story on it. I grew up in a faraway country in Latin America where even now stereotactic radiosurgery is not available for a country that has 7 million people. And I've seen as trained neurosurgeon that an open craniotomy not is always the best for a patient. And especially if it comes to cancer, when you have a brain metastasis, normally this is it in third world countries. And I do think, and I'm personally believing, and I'm convinced too, that as first world countries, we have a responsibility to provide systems, to provide knowledge, and to provide training to do dedicated radiosurgery in remote areas as well. And the second thing that comes on my personal background, as I stated before, I'm a trained neurosurgeon on brain. And if you give me the next slide, I think I can explain that if you stay with your principles, and if you keep intact your root as a neurosurgeon, regardless if you have done spine surgery eventually for the last 10 years, I think you're still able to know how anatomy of the brain works. And this is something completely different than people from other specialties that are doing radiation oncology. So when we made a decision to bring dedicated SRS to our place, we said, yes, we as neurosurgeons, we are going to take the lead. I'm going to do the training on this specific task, on this specific area. So how was our strategy? First of all, we looked at our demographics, a little about our geography. We looked at what we had in our pocket as an IP portfolio. And of course, we looked how much money we would have to invest. So starting with demographics, our primary referral for our hospital is 150,000 people, which is not much. As a tumor center, we have a secondary referral of 250,000 people. So we calculated that the metastasis would be given, and we would fight for benign tumors. We did our calculation on that, and this is exactly the next slide, the slide I presented to our board in order to say how many new cancers we have for a tumor center of 250,000 people. And you see the orange lines there. It would be about 150 lung cancers and about a little more than 250 breast cancers. Then we looked at how many metastases would we have to treat. So the second image would be that mainly lung and breast would be the main metastases to be treated. And eventually we finished our calculation of how many metastases, as we would have them given, we would have to treat. And we ended about 60 lung and about 50 breast cancers that we would have in our region. And of course, not all of them we would treat at our hospital, but we calculated 2 of 3 patients that qualify for a metastatic treatment with SRS we would have in our site. Where is Lingen? Well, I can show you. If you draw a line in between Hamburg and Den Haag, there's a black spot, and I can tell you it's not the North Sea, it's Lingen. It's just in the middle of nowhere. So we don't have any competing SRS in a 2 to 3 hours drive by car, which is so appealing for us because we don't lose our patients to big cities and big providers, and we can treat our own patients in our own site. Talking about our IP portfolio. Of course, the neurosurgeons and spine surgeons are having a little different approaches to what we call brain and what we call nerves, but trained neurosurgeons, regardless what they're doing actually, they are trained on brain. They're trained on spine and spinal cord, they're trained on nerves, they're trained on intracranial, intraspinal vasculature, something orthopedic spine surgeons just don't. And so that was one of my first decisions to be saying, okay, well, I'm not only going to rely on spine operations, but I'm going to go for a second opportunity. You need strong partners for this, and I'm so ventured to present you Max Ruge and Harald Treuer, Chief Director and Chief Physicist of University Hospital of Cologne, who has been doing stereotactic radiosurgery for more than 4 years, and I personally am very thankful to have these people helping us out and getting us trained. What were our strategic consideration and capital invest? I think, of course, the total cost of ownership is what matters. The system acquisition and maintenance costs are quite much lower than Gamma Knife or CyberKnife. You don't have a wall to be constructed, no radioactive source licensing. There are some countries that don't even allow to bring radioactive material in. And of course, the securities issue that you have with radioactive and with high voltage linear accelerators are simply not so important. So this was basically our strategic decision to, strategic considerations and thought to make a decision. And if you see the next slide, you can see that people that are willing to do something, are much more important than people that are just showing arguments. And look, this is how far we have come. Even in a Catholic hospital, I am Baptist, I have a very nice baptism pond, and eventually, hopefully in the next months, we are going to have delivered the system. So this is an existing building, we just refashioned it. And if you ask me what is the next, well, I think next is now. I think today is the chance for every one of you listening in this audience, every single radiosurgeon, every single neurosurgeon, to think about, hey, is the time come to make this decision? And from this standpoint, I think to summarize my teaser, I think SAPIX is practical and cost effective. I think there's no doubt of it. It allows world-class SRS to expand to locations beyond the big hospitals. And this is a shout to COVID. It enables us to do telemedicine as well. I'm personally convinced that planning, physical planning, and delivery in the next generation is going to be much more be qualified to do at least a part remotely. Second, it is lucrative. You don't lose your patients. And if you're a dedicated spine surgeon, it's even more attractive to you because you get a second line of income. And of course, you can reconsenter your patient that you would normally lose to oncologist. Trained neurosurgeon can do this, and to my understanding, they should do it. Because if you have a choice as a trained neurosurgeon to go for endovascular treatment, you get a lot of radiation and stand all the night doing thrombectomies. If you go for glioma surgery, all of us know that the future of glioma surgery is quite unknown. If you go only for spine surgery, you're getting older and it's a hell of a physical demanding work to do spine operations. So I do think that stereotactic radiosurgery is a very good alternative to have a third life as a neurosurgeon. I would really invite you to go with our next webinar next week, where John is going to present basic characteristics of the SAPIX as well. And of course, it is, I think, now your turn to make a decision if you either go for it or you leave it. So thank you very much.
That was great, Douglas. Yes, I think you're auditioning for a sales role at Zap. That was really good. You clearly, I think, feel many of the basic concepts that went into developing this technology in the first place. How to break down the barriers of this availability of this technology in the world was the foundation behind starting this company. But still, there are always a lot of wrinkles that come only with individual experience at individual centers. And if we aspire to be treating many of the peoples of the world, we need to make customers like you, neurosurgeons like you, successful in every possible domain. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I'm going to invite the audience to use the button at the bottom to submit your own questions. So Douglas, are you the only neurosurgeon, or how many neurosurgeons are going to be at Lingen running this machine with you? And what about on-site radiation oncology support as well?
We have a group of 6 neurosurgeons at our hospitals, and 3 of those 6 neurosurgeons are getting trained to stereotactic radiosurgery. We have neighbored radiation oncologists that are running a quite busy practice 20 kilometers north and 20 kilometers east of us, and they are going to partner us from a medical and from a physicist standpoint as well.
Okay, now are you envisioning that the technology might be attractive enough, and I even dare use the word sexy enough, that some patients might find you out of your primary catchment area? And did that go in at all? Did that factor into any of your plans?
I think the most important criteria is quality and care. If we are going to provide proof of quality, physical quality, and I'm quite sure that we are going to compare the system against CyberKnife experience from Cologne, I think we can be quite sure that we're going to be able to demonstrate that SAPIX is as good or better than standard stereotactic radiosurgery. And from a personal viewpoint, I think patients in smaller hospitals and treated or managed by small oncology teams not necessarily have worse outcome. I do think that the main criteria here is proximity to the patient and proximity to care. And I do think, yes, there are going to be people from other sites or places going to come, but I don't think it's going to be the frameless thing or the wall-free thing. I think it's quality of care.
Well, I like your perspective, and I like to think I share your philosophy. It's a sad reality that often quality doesn't come through in the way institutions present themselves to the world. They pretend it's quality when in fact they're just building a big fancy polished brand. And don't get me wrong, I mean at ZAP we're happy to be the pretty girl and prettiest girl in the block, but we ultimately, you are absolutely right, you want to offer the best care per se. Now that in fact, how do you show the world you're delivering good care? What are you in your situation, okay, in Lingen? And I know you personally, and I have no doubt you are the embodiment of the dedicated, committed, caring neurosurgeon. How do you show that to the world?
Well, we have a history and I think a tendency in Germany not to sell ourselves too much. We had a similar experience with robotic spine surgery. We are running a robotic spine, a spine robot, and doing about 250 spondies a year with the robot. We are, I think, the busiest center in Europe so far dedicated for robotic spine surgery. But we are not doing any advertising on it because I'm not sure whether the robot changes the life of a patient. I think it is more the care you give him. And so even for SAPX, I don't think personally that we're going to do a big campaign on advertising because our first goal is to serve that body of 350,000 people that are not able to get SRS, or they're not being offered SRS because it's too far away for travel.
Okay, I love it. Okay, we have a question from a kindred Latin American who says, for starters, congratulations for being from South America, Douglas. And then he says, making an effort to disseminate radiosurgery communities without much resources. And he's asking specifically, he's talking about something the exact opposite of what you just described. Instead of serving a community of 350,000, the question is, what is the capacity and throughput of the ZAP machine if you wanted to treat much larger populations?
I would say it that way. I know centers in Germany with cyberknives that are doing in between 800 to 900 patients a year. I do know centers that are doing 180 to 250 patients. I've seen ZAP Surgical in Phoenix, Arizona, and at Barrow, and it is the fastest, the most reliable, and the quickest planning software I've ever seen, because a combination of sphere packing and inverse planning, what normally limits the number of throughput because you have to engage too much personnel to do the planning and delivery. I'm quite sure that a machine, we calculated our ZAPX for 250 patients a year, but it's going to be easily to do 500 patients, to my understanding.
Well, obviously, we don't have that experience yet as a company, or any customers do, but I think theoretically, one could easily treat more than 1,000 patients if that really was your objective. But I think that at Bonifatius Hospital, that's not the objective, as you point out. And the mere fact that we can offer radiosurgery in this community, to me, is an exciting concept, because there are billions of people who live in environments like your community, and much like the community I grew up in, a very small rural community in the United States. Another question. So somebody else has, I guess is a doctor, a neurosurgeon, experienced inadequate access to radiosurgery. And they said they love your vision, Douglas, and respect your kind of dedication and astonishing effort to the task. So he feels this particular, based on your presentation, thinks that this technology is quite practical, is extremely practical. And I guess you would agree with all that, that this is a practical technology that is ready for small communities like yours.
You need instruments to do paradigmatic changes. One instrument is to be able to diagnose Helicobacter pylori, for example. And once the sudden all gastrectomies are over and they treat it by antibiotics. Yeah. So if you do paradigmatic changes in stereotactic radiosurgery, saying everything what is less than 5 times in your brain and everything that is less than 3 centimeters big belongs to stereotactic radiosurgery, you need those machines out. If not, you're simply not able to do this paradigmatic change. And I do think SAP-X is one of the first of the new generation of devices that can provide this.
I love it. So, Douglas, give you an idea. How many patients a year do you operate on in your group of 6 neurosurgeons? About how many does your group do today prior to SAP-X?
Brain tumors, we don't do any brain tumors. We are a dedicated spine practice doing about 1,500 spine surgeries a year.
So each of you is doing about 250 patients a year, approximately. Okay. Yep. And let's hope that in a few years from now, we come back, you are a brain tumor center where we learn a lot. So you said you feel that research can be done in smaller institutions, and I totally agree. But give me the concept for how a project or two you think is realistic for your institution in Lingen.
Big institutions have a big drawback in being able to follow properly patients. And in small institutions, normally the decision-making process and the care delivered to patients that are participating in scientific studies is much better. And I think we have a unique opportunity together with University Hospital of Cologne to provide both. In some part, we are in acquiring the patients and providing the treatment, whether big university centers can provide us protocols, can provide us foreseeing the results and foreseeing the delivery. And still we didn't mention, and I'm not referring to the existing indications for stereotactic radiosurgery, but I'm insisting that eventually neuromodulation is going to be something that is going to be discovered in the next generation where we have more systems available.
That's, of course, music to my ears, but that comes a long way from spine surgery. So, but, you know, as you know, as a company, we're working very hard on the basics, mostly the basic science, but soon we hope even some early clinical trials to look at how neuromodulation with radiation can work for things like addiction. So, but that's going to take a lot of work, but if you want to help out, you're more than welcome, Douglas. If anyone else has some questions, please ask up. Otherwise, I'm going to ask a last question or two, and then I'm going to let you go. So, Douglas, I assume you're somewhat of a technologist if you're playing with other forms of surgical robotics. How much do you envision driving the entire SAP-X technology machine experience? How much do you feel you're going to rely on physicists and radiation therapists to do the daily work?
I think if you do a smart setup and have the right people on board and onto the machine, I think it's going to be working nice. We have come to an agreement with PTV, for example, a company in Freiburg that has years of experience in SRS treatments to do investigations on our site we're going to provide access to all other institutions that prove to have a scientific interest to be sure that the quality of treatment and quality of care is going to be given. Because the worst thing that can happen is that we are having one of the first machines in a, as I said, God-forsaken spot and doing or making mistakes. And so we calculated small numbers for the first years to be really sure that if we provide treatments, we're going to provide good treatments. And so for that, I am confident, because the people we're going to work with are trained radio-oncologists and trained scrub staff that is going to do the delivery. They're working in other radiation machines as well. So I'm quite sure that it's going to be, for at least for our partner teams, like incorporation of a new technology into an existing radiation oncology practice.
Well, so in designing the ZapX, the hope was that it might be so intuitive and straightforward that in some places in the world where they lacked a lot of support structures, that neurosurgeons themselves could do the entire process, from all the preliminary, from making up a mask to overseeing the imaging, to doing the treatment planning, to putting the patients in the machine, treating the patients, and then following them up. That may be a little ambitious in this day and age, but in many places in the world, they don't have those kind of resources. And I mean, I think Lingen isn't Cologne, it isn't London, but it may not have all the resources, those institutions. And that's why I'm wondering if you might be more deeply involved in actually every aspect of treatment than most radiosurgery has typically experienced. And so, do you see yourself putting patients in machines and treating them? Or do you think you're still going to be mostly a supervisory role?
No, absolutely not. I'm seeing myself, I'm doing my due diligence and having my training on my license. And different than in other countries, we can do this prescriptions. So technically, we don't need a radiation oncologist. But of course, we want to partner them, because there are always indications where it is better to do a conventional radiotherapy. Sure. But we see us running the machine by ourselves once we have sufficient training and sufficient experience, of course.
Well, I love it. That was always part of our company's dream, and it's so great to see this happening with you and Bonifatius. I love your attitude. I love your philosophy. You're an inspiration to all of us, Douglas. And my hope is that there's literally thousands more Douglas Klassens in the world that will help us bring radiosurgery to so many unserved patients. So with that, Douglas, I'm going to thank you for presenting this morning. I'm going to thank everybody around the world for joining us. And I do invite you to hear my talk a week from now, where I'm going to go a little bit more into the details of the ZapX itself. So thank you, everyone, and please have a great day or a great evening wherever you are in the world. Thank you.
John, might I have a question to you?
I'm welcome. I'm open. Yes.
What do you think is the basic or the most important threat for us as a small team to get the system running and do a proper treatment?
Experience and knowledge. I mean, that's always the problem in surgery, isn't it? You can give, as Lars Lexell's, the greatest tools in the world to a fool, and you still get a foolish operation. And so it isn't the tool itself, it's the knowledge. You have the right attitude. It is ultimately about patients. As a company here at ZAP, I'm trying to foster what I'm calling a patient-centric culture, where ultimately that is what matters, great clinical outcomes for each and every patient. You have that right attitude, so that's great. But connecting that right attitude with experience takes time. And as long as you're patient, as long as the hospital allows you to be patient, you don't want your first few patients to be, complex AVMs or, trigeminal neuralgia. You want to treat some simple metastases and learn. But if you learn, Douglas, I mean, you're a technologist, and I have no doubt you, more than most customers, are more than adept at, well, philosophically and intellectually kind of mastering this technology. So, you know, if you care about your patients, doctors can do amazing things.
Thanks so much.
Well, very good. We ended on a philosophical note, but that's as good as any. So I thank you all. Thank you, Douglas, and best wishes. See you all soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Goodbye.
Dr. Klassen.
Bye-bye.